start with Sheila Jasanoff. Sheila is well known to many of you and many of us. She is the Forsheimer Professor of Science and Technology Studies at the Harvard Kennedy School at Harvard University. She's a pioneer in social sciences and explores the role of science and technology in law, politics, and the policy of modern democracies. She's written a number of books. She's held a number of distinguishing visiting appointments in leading universities in Europe, Asia, Australia, and the US. She's truly an international scholar. She's served on the AAAS Board of Directors and as president of the Society for the Social Studies of Science. She's also an elected member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and the American Philosophical Society. She holds a bachelor's degree, law degree, and PhD from Harvard University and honorary doctorates from the universities of Twente and Liège. So Sheila, I will turn things over to you now.
Alison, thanks so much for the introduction. And also, I see that we're having power outages and the lights just went off. So I don't know quite what to do about that, but you can still hear me and...
Yeah, we can hear and see you.
Okay, great. I will, without further ado, share my screen and go ahead and thank you for the honor of being invited to participate in this panel as well. Okay, so as first speaker in this panel with my very esteemed colleagues, I want to set the stage. And Alison, you said that you'd already discussed the development of nuclear power. I want to make the simple point that the social sciences are not sitting somewhere upon nuclear power. And actually, the social sciences, the particular part of the social sciences that I live in and deal with, namely science, technology, and technology studies, that has really developed very intimately in connection with nuclear power, which is something that I think people in the nuclear industry and on the technical side may not fully appreciate. So here's an image of something of a major nuclear waste disposal demonstration that happened in the mid-1970s in Germany. And with it, I want to make three kind of simple points. So the first one is the one I already said, namely that STS as a field and nuclear power have evolved hand in hand, really, in very significant ways. Secondly, that STS scholarship and the policy and politics of nuclear power have also been quite intimately linked in various ways. And thirdly, that these are transnational developments that we're talking about. So you can't talk about one country apart from another. So this chronology is a kind of demonstration of this. I mean, so years pop up in the same, you know, with different things happening that are related to one another. I went back to John Hersey's book about Hiroshima because, of course, you cannot separate history of public understanding of nuclear power from the public understanding of nuclearity writ large. I saw that you had Spencer Weird in one of yesterday's panels, and his book, which I'll mention shortly, is another of these sort of milestones in our thinking about ourselves. So you see France, Germany, the UK, the US, Japan linked up together in a series of developments focusing on the question that is before the academies in this workshop and beyond. I'm having a certain amount of trouble, but let's hope. So this little chronology that really makes the point that nuclear energy and STS scholarship cannot be prized apart. Now, this is, of course, a selective list. I've only foregrounded books and not articles and the whole body of literature. But I would say that if I am running a program on STS, I want people who graduate from it to be glancingly familiar or deeply familiar with all these books. I mean, so in that sense, these are classics of the STS literature. And very importantly, they focus on nuclear power. So Mary Douglas and Aaron Wildavsky, with their ideas of risk and culture that have permeated policy thinking, that book appears in 1982, which note is before Chernobyl. My former colleague, Dorothy Nelkin, wrote a book called The Atom Besieged about nuclear mobilization in France and Germany, also back in 1982. Brian Wynn's Rationality and Ritual, recently reissued, is another sort of foundational text in STS. And one can go down the line. So Charles Perrow's book appeared in the year of the Bhopal chemical accident and a couple of years before Chernobyl. Ulrich Beck's famous book, Risk Society, in its German version, appeared in the same year as Chernobyl. So with these books and, with the body of literature that they serve as milestones for, you can see that our attempts as collectives, as societies, as scholars, to understand ourselves, how we put ourselves into certain predicaments, that cannot be pulled apart from nuclear power. That in bringing this idea of nuclearity, of nuclear energy into the world, we've also changed in profound ways the ways in which we understand ourselves as societies. So, people talk about disciplinary siloization and how the social sciences sit apart from the other sciences and how STS is an interdisciplinary field and so forth. I think we should give up on those ideas and say that when we produce new technologies that profoundly alter the condition, we as societies that think and write and reflect are also producing new rules of understanding, and therefore a challenge is to make sure that those two streams, that we're making and doing and producing technology, and we're reflecting and understanding ourselves as beings in the world, as societies in the world, that these things have to be brought together. And that is one of the challenges confronting the topic going forward. So it is interesting that although this is so integrated, two kind of different cultures of analysis have sprung up. Largely don't talk to one another. And these are the technocratic approach and the social cultural approach. And I want to illustrate that very quickly. Each one has a series of books behind it, and I won't talk about these in individual terms, but the technocratic approach is characterized by a number of conceptual ideas that are part of STS. So quantification, that risk is defined in terms of probability and magnitude. There is an STS literature on quantification. That the science of risk assessment is thought to be separate from the managerial task of risk management. That illustrates the STS concept of boundary work. New methodologies to develop expertise. In STS, we call that a process of rationalization. In turn, that's based on framing, that we, for instance, assess trade-offs largely in economic terms, not, for instance, psychological terms or sociological or anthropological terms. We have, side by side approach, constructed this very dominant idea that the problem with the public is that they don't get it. And there is a term in STS for that idea. It's called the deficit model. And all these things together depoliticize, take out the problem of nuclear power risk assessments into a domain that's an expert domain, and in theory, out of the domain of politics. So there's a whole bunch of other books that some of them were mentioned in the chronology before that suggest there is a different way of thinking about this, and it's more social and cultural. That if you take society into account and look at how risks are put together and constructed, you ask different questions. How do risks come to be recognized as risks? Why are there differences across nations? Why are some of the risks not acknowledged? And Marcus will speak more detail to some of these points. Moreover, that this is embedded in something fuzzier, but something nonetheless real that is about culture. And this has to do with how the history of a society matters, how we frame our ideas in discursive terms, and how political cultures that are different affect the recognition, assessment, and management of risk. And we have 3 other speakers from different political cultural contexts who are going to deepen our thoughts about that. But I want to point out that we have, in effect, created 2 ways of thinking about risk over time. One of these is the idea on the left that is quite dominant in the expert community, that risk assessment and risk management should be separate, that political concerns should not enter into the science side of things, and that there is a boundary between science and politics. As against that, STS and other related social science fields suggest that there is a completely different way of thinking about these issues. And I'll just point out that it's counterpoint to some extent, that one says you can be separate, the other says, sorry, no, judge enters into these discussions, politics enters into these discussions, and it's not about science, it's about uncertainty and ignorance. The boundary that we create between what we know and what we don't know is itself a political boundary and cannot be ignored. So we stop with that as an opener and hand it over to you, Alison, to introduce the next one.
Great, Sheila, that was fantastic.